Fallen Angels, they are Survivor contestants, as those eliminated by one vote before the ultimate final tribal council, and thus are barely just not able to pitch their game at the end to the jury of those they voted out. But for an individual to be called a fallen angel, they also have to have sizable odds to win the game, had they actually made it to the end. However, 150 likes, and we'll do the same video for Merge Boots. Okay? Survivor fans love to debate robbed winners, players who came so close to victory but had it ripped away from them at the very last moment. One of the very clearest examples of this has to be Matty Whitmore in Survivor Gabon. Matty Whitmore was one of the most likable players in Gabon, which isn't saying much, but hey, at least is something. Physically strong, socially upbeat, and relentlessly optimistic. He became a central figure in the season. He wasn't the flashiest strategist, but his loyalty and underdog spirit won fans over, and more importantly, it won him the respect of the jury. But at the Final Four, everything fell apart. The Final Four consisted of Matty, Sugar, Susie, and Bob. Matty should have been safe. Sugar had built trust with him, and strategically taking him to the end over Bob made sense. But instead, Sugar sided with Bob, forcing a 2-2 tie between Matty and Bob. And in one of Survivor's cruelest twists of fate, Matty lost just like that, and his game was over. Not because of strategy or votes, but because Sugar decided to back Bob, and because his fire wouldn't light. Now, 2-2 ties leading into fire making have happened, and several of these contestants eliminated in fire were close considerations for this top 5 list. But Bob was particularly benefited by external factors. Sugar had recently lost her father and was emotionally volatile. Bob, due to being the oldest on the cast, reminded her of her father, with her viewing him intrinsically as a father figure within the small time frame the two played the game together on the island. Had this aforementioned factor affecting Sugar not being the case, Matty may have not had to go into the trial by fire. Plus, here's the real kicker. If Matty had reached the final 3 against Sugar and Susie, he would have almost certainly won. Bob's final tribal victory came from his fake idols and challenge wins, but Sugar and Susie didn't have nearly the same resume. Matty, on the other hand, had strong social bonds across the jury. He was seen as loyal, hardworking, and genuine. Against Sugar and Susie, the jury votes overwhelmingly are in his favour. Matty's loss hurts because it wasn't just about being outplayed, it was about circumstance. Sugar's flip and the fire-making twist robbed him of the chance to argue his case. And Survivor fans know if Matty had made it to the end, Survivor Gabon probably ends with a very different winner's story. When fans talk about legendary underdogs, one name always comes up. Terry Deitz from Survivor Panama, Exile Island. Terry pulled off one of the most impressive individual runs in Survivor history. 5 immunity wins, finding Survivor's first hidden god idol, and surviving against impossible odds. But despite all that success, Terry was screwed in the end. From the very beginning, Terry was an underdog. He landed on the older men's Kasaya tribe, but quickly proved himself as one of the strongest competitors out there. After the merge, Terry found himself on the out strategically, but he had 2 weapons. His raw challenge ability, and the very first hidden immunity idol with special powers, the so-called God Idol, which could be played after the votes were read. Armed with those tools, Terry went on a tear, winning 5 straight immunity challenges and keeping himself alive while the majority alliance tried everything they could to take him out. He was the definition of resilience, a one-man army carrying himself to the final 3. But here's where things turned unfair. The final immunity challenge in Panama was a balancing act on floating platforms on the water. The heavier the contestant, the more the platform sank, making it much harder to stay balanced. For someone like Terry, a muscular, heavy ex-Navy pilot, the odds were stacked against him from the start. Meanwhile, Danielle, much lighter in comparison, barely pressed down on her flute at all, giving her a natural advantage. Now you might say, hang on, Bandit. Aren't challenges inherently going to give an advantage towards some competitor? And to that I firstly asked, are you subscribed? Are you? Are you subscribed to the channel? Michael, but secondly, whilst yes, challenges benefits certain body types, like having upper body strength or being better at balance, this challenge is deeply unfair. It is literally standing on pontoons. Terry was never winning this challenge. Even if Danielle somehow slipped off, which was borderline impossible, there was still a recovery time for each new pontoon stepped on. This wasn't about skill, it wasn't about willpower, it wasn't even about strategy, it just came down to body type. A heavier, more muscular player like Terry literally had less surface area to balance on. He was set up to fail, and sure enough, Terry fell, Danielle won final immunity, and she chose to take Aris to the final two. This added extra salt to the already saltwater infested wound, as Terry had saved her just one round prior by voting alongside her so that she could beat Cirie in fire making. Terry's incredible run ended not because of his gameplay, but because of a challenge design that never gave him a fair shot. Now imagine if Terry had won that final challenge. He would have gone into the final Tribal Council against Danielle, and many argue Terry would have had a very strong case to win, with 5 immunity wins, finding and holding on to the God Idol, and fighting from the bottom the entire game. The jury respected his resilience, even if they weren't all in love with his social game. It's not a guaranteed win, but Terry would have finally had the chance to make his pitch. And in Survivor, that's all you can ask for. I mean, Shane's opening jury question literally addresses both Danielle plus Aris as being unworthy of being in the final two, and is remorseful over Terry not making it to the end. So considering he was OG Kasaya, it definitely goes to show Terry had a great chance to win. Terry's story is a Survivor tragedy, one of the most dominant individual performances the game has ever seen, underdone not by strategy, but by a challenge that overwhelmingly inherently favoured his opponent. That's why many fans still believe Terry Deitz was robbed, because he never got the chance to fight for the million at the end. That's great and all, but have you heard of something better? It's called IDOLPLAYS. IDOLPLAYS is the sponsor of this video, with over a dozen puzzles that are Survivor inspired, so you can play Survivor from the comfort of your own home. You don't have to fly over to Fiji, you don't have to starve on an island, you can actually play the Survivor puzzles for yourself, and there's over a dozen on the store, including the fire puzzle, Will It Go Round, and many, many more. So make sure to check out IDOLPLAYS, the link is in the description, and also use Bandit Survivor to be able to help me out. When Survivor fans talk about what-if players, castaways who came so close but were cut down by timing, twists, or just bad luck, one name that always comes up is Devon Pinto from Heroes vs Healers vs Hustlers. Devon played a phenomenal game, strategically sharp and likeable across the board, but despite all that success, he was usurped by Ben Driebergen and became the very first victim of the new Final Four fire-making twist. But let's dive into Devon's underdog journey, why he was so impressive, and how the game ultimately slipped away from him. Devon came into the merge with the odds stacked against him. His original Hustler tribe had just 6 members at the start of the game, and by the merge he only had 2 allies left, Ryan and Lauren, and that's not exactly a strong base to build from, but Devon made the most of it. He leaned into his calm, easygoing personality, forging genuine bonds and never making himself a target. While others scrambled and burned bridges, Devon played it cool, becoming the kind of player everyone liked having around, and what made Devon stand out was a social and strategic balance. He wasn't flashy, but he was smart. Devon knew when to lay low and when to act. He worked with Ryan and Chrissy in key moments, but also flipped on them when necessary, such as at the final 9. He helped orchestrate blindsides and managed to avoid the chaos that swallowed many of the healers. By the late game, Devon had put himself in a strong position, respected, connected, and without the kind of enemies that often had piled up. In fact, many jurors later admitted in their exit press they really liked him, which is often half the battle in Survivor. But Devon's downfall came thanks to one man, Ben Driebergen. From the final 7 down to the final 5, Ben found hidden immunity idols again and again. He played them perfectly, forcing Devon and others to constantly scramble. Devon even showed his smarts at the final 5 by placing a contingency vote on Dr. Mike, which ended up saving himself in a tight situation. But no matter what Devon did, Ben's idols kept the target off him and put it squarely on everyone else. And then came the twist that sealed Devon's fate. At Final 4, Survivor introduced, for the first time ever the mandatory fire-making challenge, which definitely isn't a controversial twist to this day. Devon, who likely would have made it to the final 3 if the vote had gone normally, was forced into fire-making against Ben, and in heartbreaking fashion, he lost. Just like that, Devon went from a final 3 favourite to the final member of the jury. He became the very first player in Survivor history eliminated by the new fire-making format. So here's the million-dollar question. Could Devon have won if he made it to the final 3? Potentially. You see, there's a reason why Devon is halfway on this list, because out of everyone we've covered, I feel like he was the least likely to win, but he was undoubtedly the most screwed. In any other season where the main target didn't have 3 idols in quick succession, then a final 4 twist unbeknownst to the entire cast, Devon makes it to the end. Now there's speculation over Ryan and Chrissy winning a final 3, with strong arguments for both. We also don't know what Devon's final speech would have been, and considering his social skills, I predict he would have made some relatively convincing pitches that could have secured him the win. Against Ryan and Chrissy, it's very possible the jury would have rewarded Devon for his underdog story and social finesse. He may not have been the flashiest player, but he was consistent, and that often wins Survivor. Devon Pinto's game is the perfect example of Survivor unpredictability. You have the social game, he had the strategy, and he had the respect to win, but Ben's idols and a brand new twist stopped him cold. Or hot. Actually, given the circumstances, yeah, it stopped him hot. Even though he didn't win, Devon is remembered as a strong, likeable player who might have been the true winner of Heroes vs Healers vs Hustlers under a different set of rules. When you talk about early Survivor legends, Lex Van De Burghe's name always comes up. In Survivor Africa, he was strategic, dominant, and positioned to win it all, but in one of the most controversial challenge calls in Survivor history, Lex was robbed of his chance at the million. In fact, many fans still to this day believe Lex should have won Africa. In Season 3, Survivor was still young, strategy was raw, alliances were new, and social dynamics carried huge weight. And in that environment, Lex thrived. He was the leader of the Baron Alliance, he formed tight bonds with Ethan Zahn and Tom Buchanan, and he played with an intensity that few had ever seen before. From orchestrating votes to controlling the tribe's direction, Lex was dominant. He wasn't always loved, his fiery temper sometimes made enemies, but there was no denying he was running the game. If Lex got to the final tribal council, the jury likely would have rewarded his aggressive gameplay with the win. But then came the infamous Final 4 challenge. The challenge was a Survivor quiz, a trivia showdown about the other contestants. One of the questions asked, which player did not have any piercings on their body? Lex answered correctly, but production marked him wrong. The official answer was supposed to be Kelly, but it turned out another contestant also fit the criteria, Lindsay. Lex was right, but he was denied the point. If his score had been counted properly, he would have been tied against Kim Johnson, forcing a tiebreaker. There's a very real chance if he wins said tiebreaker, he eliminates Kim, and then guarantees a final 3 with Ethan and Tom. And in that scenario, both Tom and Ethan take Lex to the final 2. Once at final tribal councils, Lex's resume as the mastermind of Baron and the most assertive strategist probably beats either of them, and they're both not really known as having the best talking skills anyway, especially Ethan. Have you seen that final tribal council? But that's how close Lex was to becoming Survivor's 3rd champion, and then we could have seen him versus Boston Rob in Winners at War. Instead, because of that missed point, Kim won the challenge, and then she went on to win the final immunity challenge, and when choosing who to sit next to, she chose Ethan in the final 2. That decision ended Lex's game 1 round short of the end. Ethan won the season, but Lex's shot of victory had been taken away by, quite frankly, an unfair ruling. And here's the kicker. Production knew they screwed him. Lex was one of the very first players invited back for All-Stars. He was actually guaranteed a spot, and behind the scenes he was quietly given a payout equivalent to 2nd place prize money despite placing 3rd. Survivor may not always admit mistakes, but this is their way of acknowledging they cost Lex a fair chance at the million. Lex's Survivor Africa game remains one of the most dominant early game performances. He helped shape the strategic style of the game, showed how powerful powerful loyalty and control could be, and proved you needed brains and brawn to make it far. But more than that, his story is remembered that sometimes Survivor isn't about strategy or social play. It's about circumstance, and for Lex, one incorrect call at the time changed everything. But there is somehow a contestant at number 1 that trumps even what Lex had to go through. When Survivor fans debate the greatest players of all time, one name always comes up: Cirie Fields. And in Survivor Micronesia Fans vs Favourites, Cirie delivered one of the most brilliant strategic games ever played. She was in the swing position and she controlled the Favourites tribe, a founding member of the legendary Black Widow Brigade, and very likely would have won the season if not for the unlucky twist in the game structure. From the start, Cirie positioned herself as the key swing vote on the Favourites tribe. She wasn't the loudest or the flashiest, but she had razor-sharp instincts. Cirie built bonds with Parvati, Amanda, and James while still keeping options open, letting both sides believe she was with them. The flexibility made her invaluable. No one wanted to risk voting her out because she was always needed to tip the scales, and with that, Cirie quietly took control of the Favourites dynamics. And then came the Black Widow Brigade, maybe the most infamous alliance in Survivor history. Parvati, Amanda, Natalie, Alexis, and Cirie formed a secret all-women's alliance, and while Parvati was the face of it, Cirie was often the brains. She masterminded blindsides like Ozzy's shocking elimination with an idol in his pocket. She orchestrated the humiliation of Eric, convincing him to give up his immunity necklace only to be voted out immediately. Time and again, Cirie showed why she's one of the most dangerous strategists Survivor has ever seen. If Cirie made it to the final tribal council, she likely would have won, although that vote would have been certainly close. Against Parvati and Amanda in a final 3, Cirie's social game and strategic resume would have been 2 massive advantages, assuming the jury could spell her name correctly at the end. She played the middle beautifully, she earned the respect of people without making bitter enemies, and she had some of the biggest moves of the season under her belt. But here's where fate turned against her. Micronesia was originally designed to end the final 3, like the 3 seasons before it, and all but 1 season after it. Cagayan doesn't count, it was an intended final 3. But because of the unusual number of medical evacuations, the season was scaled back to the final 2 to keep in line with the episodic schedule. That meant at final 3, Amanda won the last immunity challenge and voted Cirie out. This was such a controversial final twist, even 13 years later in Australian Survivor, Parvati was still talking about how messed up it was that Cirie wasn't in the final 3 with her and Amanda. And as for Cirie on Australian Survivor, well, if you know, you know. That being said, in other words, Cirie lost not only because she was outplayed, but because of a twist that Survivor itself had never planned for. Even though Cirie didn't win Micronesia, her game is remembered as one of the best Survivor performances of all time. She dominated socially, she controlled strategically, and she proved that you don't need physical strength to be the most dangerous player on the island. Cirie cemented herself as a Survivor legend in Micronesia, and for many fans she's rightfully the winner of that season, robbed by circumstances outside of her control. Was my top 5 satisfactory, or was there another angelic pick that you felt should have flown higher than the rest? Let me know down in the comments. Subscribe if you enjoyed. A peace!